In today's show, deputy editor from The Ringer, Justin Verrier, joins the program, and we talk all things Trail Blazers. 13 games in. What's the deal? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts. Coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's episode, a very special one. First-time guest and new Portland resident, deputy editor at The Ringer. You've heard him on the group chat podcast. You've read, I would guess, thousands of stories he's edited over the last 15 or so years as an editor. Justin Verrier, what's up, man? How you doing?
Doing great. I have to say, I'm ready to run through a wall right now after not only your open, but the whole graphic with the wall break in there. This is high quality stuff, my friend.
This is why you come to the Locked On Network, right? This is why people come here, is because we've got graphics.
we don't have graphics. This is great.
I know you guys special at The Ringer. Incredible cartoon work. I think this is the leader in cartoon work across the net. No one's getting art that complements their stories in cartoon form better than folks at The Ringer. Okay, Justin, I know you're a Connecticut local, a UConn grad, I believe. Last night, we saw, before we get into big picture stuff, last night we saw Donovan Clingan play the best game of his career. If you had to rank him next to Bill Walton, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, prime Hakeem Olajuwon, and David Robinson, is he third or second?
He's definitely in the mix there. I say no lower than 3, for sure.
Yeah.
We could talk about 1, we could talk about 2, but he's certainly in the mix. Maybe throw Mark Eaton in there because, frankly, he looks like the biggest, most imposing force in the NBA probably since. That's a big old boy who did a lot of big old boy stuff last night.
Yeah, like he blocked 4 shots in the first 5 minutes of the third quarter and just kind of like the Wolves couldn't score, and the Blazers got a big enough cushion to hold on, and then Shaedon Sharpe brought him home. Before we get into the specifics of that and the obvious future that is here, it's Donovan Clingan, league MVP. Move over Rudy Gobert. You've been unseated. 13 games in, the Blazers are 5-8. A really impressive 5-8. Actually, I think it is kind of an impressive. It's an okay 5-8. What are your sort of big picture thoughts of this team so far this season?
I think it's been about what I expected. There have been pretty low lows as recently as last week, and there have been really high highs as recently as yesterday and the game before that. But by and large, this is a team that's still figuring itself out. And the West is so good at this point. Yeah. I mean, practically the best 15 teams in the league right now, probably 12 or 13 of them are coming from the Western Conference. The Blazers just didn't really have much to compete on that level. So if you're going to be bad in any season, this seemed like the type of season to do so, especially with Cooper Flagg and all the draft prospects coming in. And like we could talk about some of the particulars about how they've been bad. But, there are young teams still trying to figure things out. And if they figure enough out, I think that this season is success, and last night was a big credit to that. The fact that Shaedon Sharpe, Donovan Clingan played so well, I think those are the type of things you want to see on the road to the prime draft pick down the road.
Is there only path to, I agree totally with the sort of data collection view of this year, right? I think there are some folks who want them to lose every single game because that's the only satisfying way to tank. And there are some folks who kind of want them to mess around and make the playoffs, which I think is impossible, but it's a noble thing to root for as a fan. But I do think the point of the season is sort of data collection. Who's got it? Who doesn't have it? Who's part of what's next? But is there any path where to you, is there any positive that isn't just the young guys look good, right? Is there any world in which it isn't just Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, and Donovan Clingan? Is there value below the headliners for this team?
I think so, because I think you see over time some of the guys on the margins do mean a lot to teams once they become top heavy, once they become star laden. Like the fact that they found Tumani Kamara means a lot. And like I think you're already starting to see people overemphasize that. And there's good reason for that. Chauncey basically said that the other night, that everyone in the league is looking for guys exactly like him who could defend multiple positions, who could be connectors offensively, and that can hit a corner three when available to them. The fact that he is now at this point has a credible 3-point shot is pretty good, and to the point where like we have to start thinking about this guy as like one of the better 3-and-D guys in the league. And so if you're picking up those along the way, I think it does matter in totality. I think the bigger question is just what to do with the veterans there, because I do think there is going to be a point. I'm one of these people just that worries that like they might be a little bit too good in order to be full-blown tanking, because you see some of the other teams in the league, the Jazz, for instance, are so very bad that if you want to be one of the worst 3 teams in the league, you do have to be on that level. And I do wonder if it's the type of thing where they might kick themselves down the road. But having said all that, I think progress from Shaedon, who might be your 1 or 2, regardless of what happens in this season down the road, I think that matters more than some of the other things.
Yeah. Okay. Too good. Too good. Do we not remember Sunday? Have we moved so far away? Like, okay. I agree that Tuesday against Minnesota was an impressive game, but it was also like such a weird outlier shooter game that I'm not going to wave it away entirely, because like they were competitive in other areas to give themselves a chance, but they made 18 threes. They shot 56% on 32 attempts. Like they just had the best shooting game of any team in the league this year. Shooting is a pretty valuable skill in the NBA. That's not it's not nothing, but it does seem like a bit of an outlier game. Wednesday, a legitimately good win. There's no caveats. That's just a good win. They beat a team that needed to bounce back, and they didn't let them. But I personally am not worried about too good yet. Sell me on too good. Like what does that look like for you?
I think the problem is when you look over at the Eastern Conference standing and you see that the Blazers at 5-8 would right now be threatening for like a top 6 playoff seed. Like there's just like a lot of bad out there. And the fact that they're in the West actually works to their benefit, because they're going to be playing so many good teams so often. And so maybe that does work its way out. But this team is like pretty competitive by and large. There have been some times where they've just kind of flatlined. The game you're referencing over the weekend, definitely prime example of that. But they do tend to play hard, even in games against, like, for instance, Thunder when they were here. They were like sticking with them until that third quarter kind of dropped, and then everything went haywire. They got back into the Suns game. They came back and beat the Pelicans in New Orleans. Like, they're just so deep, and I think there are so many guys that are looking to prove themselves, both as young players and maybe older players who just maybe are trying to like showcase themselves for the rest of the league. I'm not sure. But I think that tends to compound and lead to more wins than you're expecting. And that's something to just factor in here. I think they're going to be bad, but, you know, there's a lot of really, really, really bad. And I don't think they're on that level unless they try.
Yeah, I guess when I look at the East, like I think the Sixers are going to win some games at some point, although no guarantees. They're certainly a problem. The Bucks are probably better than 4-8.
Probably.
A little. Not a lot. They seem messy. Shout out to their future draft picks here in Portland. But like, yeah, I do think like the Wizards and the Hornets and the Raptors are pretty bad. I think the Nets are actually going to go the other way. They've probably overachieved to begin the season with an awesome offense. I think it's going to come back to earth for them. So yeah, I do think you look at the East and you're like, there might be 5 teams that are definitely worse. Utah, for tanking purposes, has maybe had some fortuitous injuries, and Keontae George has not quite figured it out, and that has helped. And the Pelicans are an absolute mess. So, like, there's always going to be one team that's a mess, but you think they wouldn't slip below the Blazers. So it's like maybe the Pelicans get right, and the Blazers still finish 14-15 in the West. But even 14-15 in the West, like you said, could be the 7th best record in the NBA. And in this weird world, 7 is probably a really bad spot to end up for the Blazers, because they're still, as good as Shaedon Sharpe looked, and I think we'll talk about that in a moment, like they're probably still star hunting in the grand scheme. Like to take the next step, they probably still need to draft I don't know if you think Shaedon Sharpe is a 1A, a 1B, or vice versa. If you think Shaedon Sharpe is a 2, with whatever letter you want to append to it. Like they need someone who's at least on his level or above it to like really be in that competitive range. I think you mentioned their depth. I think their depth is a weapon and also a challenge. Let's talk a little bit about that in the second segment. Join us there, won't you? First, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risks. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, still chatting here with Justin Verrier of The Ringer. Justin, you mentioned the Blazers' depth. I know that you're a Ryan Rupert appreciator. I don't know if you're a capital B believer, but I think you are a capital A appreciator. I think Chris Murray had a pretty good little stretch last night after being on the shelf a bunch. The Blazers have shown they have some depth at center with the way Rob Williams and Donovan Clingan have played. Do they have, in a weird way, too many dudes? Like, is this depth a challenge for them in some ways?
I think so, and that kind of gets into the motivations. Like, are you trying to rear the young guys first and foremost? And in that lens, then yeah, like the fact that Klingon just starts last game when we're already 12 games into the season thereabouts, I think is something to mark. Because I think everyone would probably agree that he is the long-term projected starter at that position. I think last night he proved why. And I also think like the fact that he can be so imposing defensively makes things a little bit easier for the other guys you're trying to develop on the wing. Does Ryan Rupert, for instance, is taking something off his plate defensively make it a little bit easier for him to flash offensively? And Chris Murray and so on. Even Denny Avdia, who's struggled this season, like taking a little bit more off his plate, letting Klingon do that. Does that help that in that regard? I just think like letting guys play first and foremost is the biggest advantage a losing team has because those in-game reps are so invaluable. You could send guys to the G League. It's just not the same. And so just like decluttering things first and foremost is important. But I also think like you saw the energy and like the enthusiasm they all played with. There was something going on there. And that's not to say that Anthony Simons or Jeremy Grant or DeAndre Ayton are doing anything wrong. But there's just sort of like a pep to those guys, even Scoot Henderson, like being out there that is unmistakable. There's something about like youthful exuberance that I think does trickle down. And maybe it's the fact that like, you're just very clearly carving out your identity as this young, fun team as opposed to something in the middle. And so that's just kind of like a really word soup to say that like, yeah, I think it's good because you can get back into games like we saw earlier in the season. But on the other hand, like if everyone knows you're going to beat this team, there's something to just going and pressing the button being that team.
Yeah, I've been in favor of them kind of committing to this, here's our group, and not, and very specifically kind of trading Anthony Simons and exploring deals for Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton for many moons. I've been on it since February of last year at the trade deadline. It's like, this is the time to do it. Go ahead and explore it. Again in the offseason, go ahead and explore. They didn't choose to do that, right? They've practiced some level of patience. There is something to it that it felt like at the time, and I think there's some logic here. It's like Scoot Henderson's just maybe not ready for that. But what does not ready mean? Like I would be my pushback. Because like, what does not ready mean for a team with the goals the Blazers have? To some extent, the value of that Delano Banton has brought to the court allows for some maybe easier decision making because you have another somewhat capable young guard. He's 4 months younger than Anthony Simons. Youth movement. But then like you look at the center stuff. When you draft Donovan Clingan 7, you know he's the future. But then when he shows up as the present, it's like, it does get a little tricky, right? Like I think it felt more comfortable. Like when Scoot was struggling and Anthony Simons just playing ahead of him, it's like, yeah, whatever. Like maybe not ideal, but you're playing the better player. But when Anthony Simons struggles to begin the year And I mean, Scoot hasn't been better than him still, but like, and then when Donovan Clingan looks better than, maybe not better, but he was in one game. Certainly, he's as good as certainly a better single performance than DA's had this year. It does get a little bit odd, right? And it feels more comfortable saying, well, Donovan Clingan can only play 15 minutes, and then he shows out in 31, and it's like he's ready for more. I'm curious on sort of your view of the young guys. Where are you at with the Scoot Henderson in year 2, Shaden Sharp in year 3 type of stuff? Like, what do you think? What do you make of the Blazers' young core?
I'm pretty high on Shaden. I think a lot of people across the league are. I think they just saw the combination of not only athleticism, but just like a fluid, smooth athleticism that you just really can't teach. And you're like, that guy's got it. Whatever it is, it seems like Shaden has that. And the combination, obviously, not only of just to get up around the rim and be like a force in that regard, but also the shooting. Just like that combination is what everybody in the league wants. And I think you're starting to see him playing with more force, more aggressiveness, which seemed to be the issue. You would probably know this more than anyone. Just like in years past, the consistency, the waning enthusiasm. If he just like gets that into gear, I think he could be a pretty electric all-star caliber of scoring guard. And so I feel pretty high on him as long as some of the other stuff clicks into place. Some of the more like emotional intelligence sort of stuff, more of the like becoming a veteran, frankly,
Right.
and being healthy first and foremost in order to do so. Scoot, as you know, is a little bit more of a complicated story. It's funny, every time I'm ready to write him off, he has games like he's had recently where it's like, oh, he's definitely showing more. Like I'm just like ready to pull the plug at a certain point just because I haven't seen the sort of pop that would suggest that he would be the type of player like a lot of people expected when he was drafted number 3 overall. I think we're all still waiting for that happened, but he plays with so much effort. And there are a little flashes more recently of him processing things on a higher level where I'm like, oh, okay. So like, I don't know ultimately what he'll be. I would be surprised at this point if he was a star. I think right now you're probably setting your expectations around starter. If he could just be like Mike Conley 2.0, like a steady organizer who could do a little bit of everything for you and be like an adult in the room. But he's a young guy who came into the league more based off of his athleticism and electric sort of pop on that end. So it would take a lot to get there. And so it's a little bit more mixed here. I don't want to write him off just yet, though, because I do think he tries really hard and he really wants it. And I think that's part of the whole thing. If you're someone who actually has some of the tools that he still has in his chest.
Yeah, he's curious, right? I agree with you. There's been, I think the first 5 games of this season, while the numbers weren't great, if you watched him play, it's like that dude. That's a dude who's getting better. Like he's getting better. He was still struggling with the jumper and all that, and the finishing was still a little bit dicey. But like you could see it in front of you. And then I think he had like a stretch of like 5 or 6 in a row where it's like, and then I think the 2 against Minnesota, one really solid one, and then kind of a stinker where he wasn't awful, but he was like not this choice when they needed to win, and he was not the choice when they needed to win very correctly. Like Delano Banton was the better guard. They went with him because that was going to give them a better chance to win. And like Scoot had 5 turnovers, a couple real puzzling ones. He threw a lob past to Shaden Sharp from like the hash mark, and he threw it like he was at the other hash mark. He put an extra 25 feet of juice on that thing. It clanged off the backboard, and one of the people on press row who's sitting next to me said, "What was that?" Like they were looking down typing or whatever. Like, what happened? Like, I've never seen a ball rocket off the backboard like that. Like, what was going on? Yeah, he's just so up and down, and the downs are really low, and the highs aren't that high. But I think it's too early to say it's definitively one thing. But I do think like the ceiling, your projection of Scoot's ceiling has precipitously dropped. For fear of you being an incredible homer, how good can Donovan Clingan be? Like what I think obviously like sort of prisoner of the moment stuff, right? We're coming off the best performance of his season and maybe the best performance any rookie has had in a game all year long, right? In a somewhat underwhelming draft class, that might have just been the best game a rookie has played this year with Donovan Clingan's game. What do you make of what he can become?
Is better than Wemby too high, or is that now the expectation? No, I think very highly of him. I thought highly of him as a prospect, even independent of my clear and unabashed UConn homerism, in part because not only does he have the size, there's just something about how he's wired from a competitive standpoint, but also his feel for the game that I think is noticeably different than Zach Edey. Like, Zach Edey is a big old angry masher, and I think he fits the Grizzlies quite well for that reason. The fact that he can play off of John Morant, off of like the lobs, and also just because they have a little bit of a nastiness to that thing that I think he really embodies. For him, I didn't think he would be much of a prospect, but clearly he fits there, and I think he's going to be pretty good there. Kling, I think, is just the type of guy that could fit practically any situation. He's just I've been startled by how big he is, frankly. Like, I knew he was a big old boy. He's just like, he is math in a way that, like, frankly, Scoot, now that I've been around Scoot a little bit, he's smaller than I thought he was. But Klingon's the complete opposite, where it's just like, he's huge comparison to Rob Williams, who's in his own right a very huge center-sized human. And I think there's just like such a high floor for him in that regard. But on top of that, he has a feel, man. He just like knows where he is on the court. I do think the conditioning is going to be the big issue for him, and it already has, to the point where when he was playing an extended run last night, you could already see him huffing and puffing, and then you start to worry because Chauncey Billups has been very upfront about the fact that, sometimes he gets winded pretty quickly. And I get it, because he's massive, like these. So I think he needs to work through that over the offseason, probably 2 off seasons, in order to be able to play 30 plus minutes a game. But the fact that he's showing flashes like this thus far, I mean, is a really good sign.
Yeah, the defensive feel is just really high. His ability to understand what he is, right? He doesn't get himself out of position. He's not a block chaser necessarily. Like, he's a dude who blocks shots, but he doesn't chase blocks. He only had one last night that I noted where he chased a block and Rudy Gobert got behind him for a dunk, and he didn't do it again. He was like, okay, that's a crappy move. Like, if I do that, like, that's a bucket. I'm giving up points. Like, and so he stayed attached. He played about as dominant a 5-minute stretch as you can play at age 20 in his 12th NBA game, 13th NBA game, I guess, his second start. The opening 5 minutes of the fourth quarter against Minnesota was as good a defense as you can play as a big man. He was mostly in drop coverage, but when they were guarding Anthony Edwards, particularly in some double pick and roll situations, they were showing a little bit. He was hedging and recovering. Like, he was out further from the rim, which I think is outside of his comfort zone a lot. And then he's getting back and like blocking Naz Reid on a drive. He's staying down and blocking Rudy Gobert on a putback attempt. He's getting kicked in the hip, I guess. He called it a hip. He said he got kicked in the hip. He told us it was a hip, not a groin shot. It looked like he got hit from my vantage point, right in the groin. And I was like, oh no, that's the worst way to end your best night in the NBA. But he said he got hit in the hip. But it was a great block. Like, he stood strong against Julius Randle, who's an absolute bull, and blocked him. Like, he's got a great feel and a competitiveness. And the competitiveness and the fire, and you mentioned it, and I think we've kind of been dancing around this. The Blazers in the last 2 games have looked good. And they've done it without Anthony Simons and DeAndre Ayton on the court. I think it is maybe not the elephant in the room, but it is undeniable. You cannot deny that it happened. Let's talk about that in light of kind of where this team is to close the show. Join us in the third segment. First, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can tackle the NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check the latest stats, you can view play-by-play, you can get all that info and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 of bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. Still listening to Locked On Blazers with Justin Verrier of The Ringer. I always ask everyone this to begin the third segment. What kind of pickup player are you? If I'm a pass first point guard, what are you out there, Justin?
Does retired count?
It does.
Yeah, I was more of like Chuck Hayes, like small center back to the basket sort of guy. But frankly, I didn't get very far, and I haven't indulged in a very long time. So I think retired
Chuck
is the
Hayes,
best.
listen, Chuck Hayes used to give LaMarcus Aldridge fits. He could not figure out. Chuck Hayes was probably the player who LaMarcus had the most struggles trying to figure out. Yeah. He was
Chuck
just
Hayes
big
was
and in the way. Big and in the way. It's like this dude's 6'4". Why is he playing center? And then it's like, I can't move him. What's the deal? And it allowed Yao Ming to play off the ball. It was okay. We could really go back to 2008. Just and I have been in the game for a minute.
Right.
Okay, undeniable. The Blazers look good the last two games, and they're missing two of their premier players, two of their highest paid players, and two guys who are going to start and going to play when they are available. I think that is just factual. I don't think there's a world in which if DeAndre Ayton and Anthony Simons are cleared to play, that they're not going to be in the starting lineup and playing 30 minutes, 29 plus minutes, and Ant 35 minutes probably. Are they in a position where it is imperative in your eyes that they move those two gentlemen?
I wouldn't say imperative, but I think it would behoove them for the reasons we talked about before. I think it's difficult, though, because it's kind of a trickle-down effect to moving them that might open up more problems. For instance, if Scoot isn't going to help get other guys organized and be pass first and like actually add to Shaden and Denny and all those other guys' development, is having a steadier hand in Anthony Simon actually better for them? Now, is Anthony Simons that pass first guy? Probably not. But then that opens up the other problem where if he's not playing well, which he hasn't thus far this season, then where's his trade value at? And does he need to play, if only to help his trade value? Does he ever get to that point? Because right now he's out with what seems to be an illness. And it's equally as complicated with DeAndre Ayton. And so, like, for instance, we just talked about the conditioning problems with Donovan Clingan. And we didn't talk about like the fact that against smaller teams, I think he can be exposed a little bit because of the drop stuff that you mentioned. Against OKC, for instance, he seemed out of sorts because all these little guys were just flying around him and swiping down at the ball. And he's like, what's going on? He could do better with Zion trying to go through his chest because he's a big guy who could take that. Not as good against small ball. Honestly, I was surprised that the Wolves took forever to get to that look in order against him in order to tire him out. But that's a whole other story. If he can't play more than 20 minutes, including with foul trouble, well, then is Rob Williams going to be healthy enough in order to soak up the backup minutes? Is Dwap Breath a credible option at that point? Because he's a stretch, but not much of a defender. And so, like, there are a lot of, like, small complications with moving on for them that I have to assume the Blazers are considering themselves. So I think it's easy to say in the big picture, let the young guys roast and let's see what happens. That's fun. Like, we'll just play through that. On the other hand, I could see why they've been more hesitant thus far.
Yeah, I think I think I agree with that logic. I was banging the drum for them to trade them at the trade deadline in February last year. So, but I kind of, even if it's my like personal opinion that they've been too patient or too unwilling to make these moves, I kind of get the logic against my own personal feelings. Although I'm a podcaster, I deserve to be right all the time. That's how it works. That's my birthright. Is I should get to be always correct. I also think one of the complications is that you're not just trading someone making DeAndre Ayton's money for nothing. Like, he makes $35 million. He's not going to have a big trademark. Like, his trade value when he came to the Blazers was that's probably exactly what it is, if not a little bit less. I can't imagine his trade value has gone up since playing for the Portland Trail Blazers. He's not been very good to begin this season. He's like, just his counting stats are way down. And he got traded for Nasir Little and Yusuf Nurkic. And they had to throw in a first, in exchange, I guess, for the Grayson Allen was the prize in that trade for Phoenix. But they had to throw in a recent draft pick to make it work in Toumani Camara, who's almost certainly the best player traded in that trade. Who would have known? So I can't imagine his trade value is higher than it was a couple years ago. He makes $35 million. If you're trading someone making $35 million, you're not getting back nothing. You're probably getting back other vets who have to play, or at least one vet who has to play and another dude who you send to Cabo or something like that. And it doesn't magic. You're not just like sending them to the moon. You don't naturally solve all of your problems. You could maybe fix it so you check some other boxes. But I feel the same way about Anfernee Simons. Like his trade value can't be particularly high. We saw what like Terry Rozier got traded for. We've seen the Heat fail to trade Tyler Hero, Jordan Poole, throw it in the mix, and Anfernee Simons has been bad to begin this year. I don't think his trade value can get much higher, right? Like I think there's after 6 years in the league, and based on what he is, a not quite point guard, like a combo guard who doesn't defend. I think his archetype is his archetype, and it's just not that valuable. And he struggled to begin the year. So it's like, one of the challenges for the Blazers is, do they value addition by subtraction, or do they say, we don't want to take a bad deal, let's continue to wait, let's continue to kick it down the road? I would assume not taking a bad deal is an important part of running an NBA team, but maybe they see some stuff with this group that they value. Do you believe in the, like, obviously, like, knowing what we know about the challenges, do you think it's worth it to a team like the Blazers, who has goals to lose, to kind of prioritize that deal, though? Like, I know it's maybe not imperative, but like knowing that all the reasons you mentioned, if Scoot can't organize stuff, if the minutes don't shake out, like if losing is an okay byproduct, does that change the calculation?
Yeah, I think it really depends probably more on the interpersonal stuff. To if those guys are going along with the program to the point where they're okay if, for instance, all let's just say that hypothetically Scoot takes off and he's closing games now and Ant isn't. Is that going to be an issue with Ant in the locker room and whatnot? And that's when it tends to get dicey. I will say thus far, and I've only been around the team for as long as the season has gone on, it seems like things are going fairly well in the locker room. Jeremy Grant, first and foremost, I feels like a pretty steady vet. And it seems like, if anything, he's having a little bit of fun playing with some of the young guys. And it seems like he's unlocked some of like the defensive stuff that he maybe lacked last year. Like the weak side blocking is all of a sudden a big part of his game again. And I wonder if playing next to Klingon is just going to enhance that. So I'm almost like, actually, maybe Grant should stick around if nobody wants him. Like, he seems like the type of guy who can fit around regardless of whatever shape the roster takes. I think Answer's just like a little bit tougher in that regard. And for instance, if you wanted to up his trade value, I do think one of the things a lot of onlookers across the league are probably looking for is like, how is he in the pick and roll? How is he operating? How is he finishing at the rim? Some of those more downhill point guard qualities that, he's definitely developed over time, but maybe aren't his strong suit at this point. Like if I'm the Lakers, for instance, and I just want to swing for the fences, get more juice to my offense, I want to be sure that Ant's the type of point guard who can run second units, who can get other guys involved, can run pick and rolls with AD, spam that, and then that could be my future post LeBron. And obviously you need to play through that if you're the Blazers, because you would want to show that. And so I think it's fine. It's a long-winded way of saying like until it gets messy. And right now, I think it hasn't gotten to that point, which is a credit probably to Chauncey. I know that he doesn't have a lot of defenders these days, but one thing I think he's done well at is getting guys to buy in from Ant on down.
Yeah, Chauncey is good at the interpersonal stuff. Guys like him. Like if you talk to guys, every time a reporter tries to write a story about like, is Chauncey in over his head, and they like go ask the players are like, no, he's good. We like him. No, he's a good, like no one even does like the off the record. Yeah. No one even does the off the record thing. Like, hey, it's sometimes it can be challenging. Like people defend him and they defend him on record and they like want to give quotes to say that they like him. So if nothing else, he keeps guys in, mostly pulling the rope in the same direction. And I think there's some value there. The other stuff, I think he's proven to not be as good at, and maybe I think fairly obviously from both sides, he seems to be a short timer here, based on all of his podcast appearances this summer and the Blazers' sort of approach to how they've handled it. So what is? I'll end on this. What does like a good rest of the year look like for the Blazers? Does a good rest of the year look like 5 wins, shut this thing down, or does a good rest of the year look like they're plucky and like and you kind of see the outlines of a good team? Like where on the spectrum should they be aiming to land?
I think the latter is what I would be looking for. I think first and foremost, you want to see if Shaedon has it, like superstar. Like what level is he going to be? Because I think everyone's kind of assuming he's going to be good, but how good in what ways, I think is still an open question. And I don't want to just see games like we saw against Minnesota the other night. I want to see that for 2 straight weeks. I want to see that for a month, because that's the difference. Like we hear all the time, like the difference between star and everybody else is just consistency. And if he can put that together, if he could be plucky, to use your word, on the defensive end, like then you got something there. And that's something you can hitch your wagon to regardless of what's happening in the draft. And it kind of filters down from there. I want to see Tumani keep this up, because at this point, like he's probably been their best, or at least most consistently good player this season. Just like steady as all hell, that guy. I would like to see him continue that, and probably even get into the all defense consideration sort of mix there toward the end of the season. I think he has that in him, if not this season, then maybe down the road. And then it's just like little things from the newer guys. I want to see Scoot, like be able to orchestrate some offense, maybe finish a little bit better at the basket. Klingon be able to let's see him work more handoffs in the offensive game, because I think that's just going to unlock what he can do in that and even more. So it's like I would say big picture Shaedon first and foremost, because that is the foundation for every successful NBA team. And there it's just like small wins. And frankly, like I only know the fan base a little bit. You know better than me. I think that's kind of what they're looking for as well, just to see that the future that they've been sold, there's something here beyond just playing for a pick. Because like I would watch that week in and week out just to see these guys kind of just figure out new elements of their game.
I will say, speaking to the fan base, I got this exact text message today from a Blazer fan who's a friend of mine. He said, we're going back and forth about the game. He says, it kind of sucks that we're already out of the Cooper race. Come on.
Too good. I'm telling you, too good.
13 games. Come on. 13 games in. Anything is possible. I think I agree. I think the best Cooper Flag scenario or whatever, Ace Bailey scenario, is that the reason that you miss out on it is because Shaedon Sharpe is too good to let you fail, right? Is because he's too good to let you fail. And I think you hit it on the head. It's consistency. It's not the peaks. It's how many nights can you reach your peak in a row. It is not 33 against the Wolves. It's 29 against the Hawks on Sunday. It's out on the road after that and some really good games, because once a week is an okay player. Twice a week is a starter. 4 times a week is a star. That's just how it works, and you got to work your way to 4 times a week. Justin, if folks are looking for more of you, where can they find you?
Let's see. Group Chat Podcast, Mondays and Thursdays on the Ringer NBA show feed, at Justin Verrier at various platforms. I guess we're not doing Twitter now, so find me in whatever next level dystopic social media that we're doing.
Yeah, now we're all on some other social media platform that will also be bad. Just wait, y'all. It'll be bad soon. I've been around long enough. Shout out to my elder millennials. I've been around long enough to know how this goes. Facebook was cool. Dear listeners, come back next week. 5 more shows. Next time you hear my voice, Blazers will have played the Hawks on Sunday evening. We will talk about that game, and we'll do it 5 more times next week, because that's what we do wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Tell your friends about the program. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.